Hey there, Melissa. Welcome to the Untangled Faith podcast.
Hi, Amy.
You are my longtime guest. You're like the winner of most frequent guest on our podcast. There should be an award for that
Oh, like
or
Nobel Peace
payment.
Prize.
Oh, yes. Timely.
Just give me yours.
Timely. I'm sure I can find someone to give it to you. They'll be just fine. So the last time I mentioned this thing that we're talking about today, which is an update on some of the lawsuits involving Ramsey. I know we're talking about at least one. I don't remember if we're talking about more than one. I assumed that this lawsuit that was scheduled to go to trial at the end of 2025 was going to happen. And it is January 21st, 2026. Has not happened.
No.
And so I thought maybe this would be a good time to sort of talk about what we think is going on there and maybe address some questions people might have. We can imagine in our minds what those questions are.
Yes, that sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah. So this lawsuit is the O'Connor case that was first filed in the summer of 2020,
20,
I believe.
2020.
So it's been more than 5 years, 5.5 years. And we had been waiting for quite a while for an answer to a request for summary judgment. And then it seemed like the judge had said, "Hey, I'm still working on this. I am actually working on this, but in the meantime, let's set a date for trial." And they did. And the date has come and gone, and here we are.
Mm. And for people who
Tell
don't
us your
understand,
thoughts.
yeah, people who don't
Yeah.
understand why a case would be, 6 years in, this case was filed in federal court, which is
Mhm.
notoriously slow compared to state courts. Federal courts are very busy and they are legally required to prioritize criminal cases. There's speedy trial rights that criminal defendants have. And so if things come up related to criminal cases, that often takes a lot of their time. There are
Yeah.
often also vacancies in judgeships or magistrates who are kind of lower judges that assist the named judges that are approved by Congress. So when there's not a full slate of judges, or there's lots of criminal cases in a certain court, civil cases can sit and languish for years. And so
So
this
it's not
case,
necessarily a sign that something was weird.
right?
This could be a typical thing. Also, 2020 when COVID hit did kind of slow things down and change the timing with the court system. Am I making that up or is that your understanding?
No, I think that's true. I think everything got wonky for a while, and people had to
Yeah.
settle in. How are we doing this? Things that used to be done in person are then done online, and actually, I think over time that will speed things up in some ways.
Yeah.
But this case was kind of trucking along for a couple years, and then it was actually Ramsey Solutions, Lampo Group, that filed for summary judgment. And that's
Yeah.
not uncommon. The defendant in these cases, they were the defendant. They say, even if you take these things as true, there's not really a, a disagreement about the facts. And we would be entitled to win as a matter of law based on this is not this type of discrimination, or the things we did were according to facts that we all agree on were justifiable, things like that. So that's kind of, it's not uncommon for a defendant in a case to file a motion for summary judgment. And a lot of cases end
And
up
that
getting
bypasses a
dismissed.
jury trial, right? They
Yes.
say, we think we're all in agreement here on the facts. Judge, just call it for us.
Right.
Just
Right.
just
And
yeah.
and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything nefarious, especially like contracts cases where the
Yeah.
dispute is over the terms of a contract. And, that's a legal issue. Did everybody agrees on what the actions were in some cases, in those cases where everybody agrees, okay, this is what happened, here's the contract.
Yeah.
Usually it turns on a legal interpretation, so not necessarily something that has to go to a jury, and so that would end at summary judgment. So Ramsey Solutions filed a motion for summary judgment, but the huge thing that happened with that was then it became about the evidence that had been collected in discovery, which is discovery is when
Mm,
each party issues requests. And it doesn't have to be necessarily things that you would use at trial. It has to have some relevance to, and then they fight
sure.
about it later.
Yeah.
But after that motion for summary judgment, what happened was an all-out battle over what was under seal and what was unsealed, because the courts have a default to be open to the public, and it
Yeah.
it promotes confidence in decisions in the judiciary. And so when you make motions like this, you're referencing a lot of this information that you've obtained in discovery. And so if everything is redacted or everything is under seal, then nobody can examine what happens in the courtroom. So
Yeah.
often news agencies or the other party will say, this doesn't need to be under seal. And that's really what happened here. And it was as a result of that, that thousands of pages of what was previously hidden internal piece of information at Ramsey Solutions, including emails and files and different things, became public. Some were still
Yeah.
redacted, but they became public. And then that battle went on for a long time. And then it just sat after that, pretty much
Yeah.
just waiting.
For a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, two and a
So we were
half
waiting
years,
on
I
that.
think.
There was another one, there was another case we were thinking that was scheduled somehow we thought might happen first, the Amos case. And that has now been punted to sometime this spring, I believe. And so if some people are confused, there's more than one case that's happened. And in both cases, a lot of back and forth about what should be allowed to be included as part of discovery and that should apply to the argument at hand. So if you're confused, it is happening in both cases. The other case is still in process, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I mean, we found it really interesting because this is what I believe. My legal analysis is this: the O'Connor case, what some people call like the pregnant woman, the
Yeah.
unwed pregnant mother, was the stronger of the cases with respect
Yes.
to the evidence that existed and with respect to the legal arguments. And so the fact that this one was going to go to trial first, uh, I my analysis was, well, that would bode well potentially for the second case, because
Yeah.
um, this was a stronger case. And my sense was that either it would be settled before going to trial, because trial was not going to be pretty for Ramsey
Right.
Solutions,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the plaintiff was going to win at trial and win
Yeah.
pretty handily.
What do you think was the strongest argument for the plaintiff in this O'Connor case?
I mean, I do
I
think,
mean, you haven't talked strategy with any of these attorneys. You have been, you were on the witness list, so that was not going to be anything that happened. But like, just as an outsider, your opinion, not official
yeah, and I
attorney.
should say before we even go any further, we have no inside information regarding this case. We
That's
have
right.
not talked with the plaintiff about the current status of the
Yeah.
case, about the trial that didn't happen, about any potential settlement. We have no,
Yeah.
I'm using my skills as a
I have
lawyer.
never, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
And I'm just saying,
yeah,
same for me. I have not reached out and said, what's going on? And
yeah,
she hasn't reached out to me. I am happy to leave that barrier there to
yeah.
preserve the integrity of that.
Yeah,
So this is
strongest,
not no inside information.
I think the strongest argument here was the disparity
Hmm.
between how they treated her situation and how they treated other situations of what they wanted to call lack of righteous living. And obviously that involved my own situation, but there were
Yeah.
others as well. And I think,
Yeah.
it's interesting because there seemed to be clearly a disparity in some ways in favor benefiting men. I think,
Hmm.
I've not been quiet about the fact that my own experience with Dave Ramsey, of a misogynistic flavor. And I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
it is very hard for a leader of a company, for their own perspectives and opinions and biases not to bleed out into how a company operates and how people are treated. So I think there,
Yeah.
if that had gone to trial, you would have had a jury that would have been exposed to, again, lots of internal emails and how they talked about
Yeah.
people and practices that would have kind of shocked some people that, well, that's not normal for a company to do.
Yeah.
And also like, well, you're giving this group of people a a number of chances, but these pregnant mothers, it's like boom, you're out. And also the
Yeah.
fact that they don't necessarily have hard evidence of certain things, and they use a lot of shame. And so I think that disparity would have been the strongest thing in front of a
Yeah.
jury.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, but that kind of was my impression too, is there's lack of consistency in how they enforced what they said was their values or their guidelines. And there were some interesting things that we saw attached to things that were publicly filed. One of the last things that I saw as a part that was put on like on Pacer was a recording from a former board member who had, said something on his Instagram about how he just got out of a meeting and how he was bragging and praising how Ramsey did their processes and how glad he was that they did not have policies and procedures, something like that. It was wild
Yeah.
to hear actual. He was a board member. He's no longer working there. Is what I've seen. To specifically say publicly, we kind of take it case by case.
Well, and I think, especially when you think about being in front of a jury, people who work at companies and who are used to a company having policies and procedures and standards, which protect people, it gives people predictability, it legally
Yeah,
protects them, and creates a system where people are at least more likely to be treated equally and to know what the rules
yeah,
are. I think that would have been another thing here. You say, what we were talking about here was this principle of righteous living. And,
yeah,
if I had been on a jury, I certainly would have questioned, well, so righteous living is only having sex outside of marriage? I mean,
yeah.
it's
Very specific way. Yeah, yeah,
it's not, what about lying? What about, all these other
yeah,
things? And if you say, it's a Judeo-Christian values, there's a whole plethora of things that are either righteous or unrighteous. And to hone in on sex outside of marriage as your
yeah,
primary guide, and to try to dice that with what they called premarital sex, which is the small kind of hole they wanted to put the plaintiff's complaint into, because she was in a
yeah,
relationship, and according to them, she was in a relationship having sex in that relationship. They wanted to separate that from what they wanted to call extramarital sex, which is
yeah,
having an affair, which I think a
yeah,
jury or pretty much anybody would have said
yeah.
that's actually way worse. Way
Yeah, I
worse.
think it's likely that Ramsey was trying to argue that they weren't comparators. They
Hmm.
weren't equally, like, similarly
Right.
situated. We didn't get to see a jury. The jury didn't get to see anything. We didn't get to hear Ramsey's official argument.
Mhm.
But I would imagine they would have argued, we are a private company. We have the freedom to make our own hiring and firing decisions. And as a Christian organization, I would imagine they might have leaned on that this was against, it was some sort of persecution against them being able to run it according to their Christian standards. And I can imagine them using that argument. But I also can imagine that the pushback on that was the problem here is that you didn't actually consistently
Why?
uphold what you said.
Yeah, and
And that would likely be the gotcha on that.
that would have been more of a PR argument versus a legal
Yeah.
argument, because you can't really say, well, we are a private, not religious company, and we get to violate whatever discrimination laws that exist, because the crux of some of this was pregnancy discrimination. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you know that's how they found out or alleged that, these women deserve to be fired. But in all these other situations where men are engaging in sexual, what the biblical term is sexual immorality, or they're not
Yeah.
firing them in most of those cases. So it's a dicey thing. But I think if a jury had heard a lot of this evidence, my sense was that the plaintiff would have won handily, and it would have been a PR
Yeah.
nightmare for the company. Which brings us
I
to,
think it would have been really embarrassing. I think it would have been really embarrassing for Ramsey. I would have thought, I anticipated that he would try to avoid having a public trial at all
yeah,
costs
yeah,
without having any conversations with him,
yeah.
obviously, as an outsider. Yeah.
And that brings us to what
Which leads
what
us
we
to now.
believe has happened, which I'm 99% certain this case is settled. The case is settled.
So since the day the trial was scheduled, it came and went. There was nothing that we saw happen. You and I had both originally been deposed as witnesses. We'd never heard anything. We were never notified that we were going to need to be ready to go to a trial. Nothing ever happened with that. I never heard anything. And the date of the trial came and went. We saw no filings until a little bit later. And so there have been a couple of public filings since then. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there was a motion by the plaintiff to dismiss the case. I'm looking at it right now, with all costs and fees to be paid by the party incurring same, which means each party is paying its own costs and fees. And that tells you there was a financial settlement, because there's no way that a plaintiff who has pursued a case for 5 years,
5.5
right, and
years.
their attorneys, her attorneys have incurred, my guess is hundreds of thousands of dollars in billings.
Multiple attorneys on the
Yeah,
case. Yeah.
multiple attorneys at a small firm. And so they've got a receivable of what I believe hundreds of thousands of dollars into this case.
Somebody would have to pay that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so because each is paying their own, that tells me that there is a settlement fee that Ramsey paid the plaintiff, and her lawyers are getting whatever the agreement was on the front end for a contingent fee. Usually it's a third to anywhere from 30 to 40%, and that's how they're getting paid. And that would not happen without some kind of financial settlement. And this case was incredibly contentious. The
Yeah.
lawyers and the fights back and forth, just an incredible amount of fees. So yeah, so I'm, like I said, 99% certain this case settled for what I would expect to be a large financial payment from Ramsey Solutions to the plaintiff.
Do you expect that we will ever hear anything publicly from either party? What generally happens in a case like this from what you've seen in your, observation throughout the years?
So, in a lot of cases, sadly for some, especially cases that involve some type of misconduct, especially if there's like sexual abuse or bullying, workplace misconduct, in most cases, there is a confidentiality agreement tied to the financial settlement. And I say unfortunately because actually, in some states and in some areas, there's been efforts, and some successful, regarding not having those type of confidentiality clauses associated with, whether it's sexual abuse settlements. So for example, like
Sure.
in the Harvey Weinstein case, the reason why people didn't know that this was a long-term, decades pattern was he engaged in these settlements, and they involved non-disclosure, non-disparagement, confidentiality clauses,
Yeah.
and nobody could talk about it.
Hmm.
So this is not Harvey Weinstein, but we are looking at a case where we have both experienced and we have seen a company led by a bully, and that engages in very unhealthy behavior, both from the hiring point throughout the company to when they emotionally fire, get people to leave. And not everybody experiences that unhealth, but there are many people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
have. And so in a case like this, where a public open trial, I would argue, would be a very
Yeah.
good thing to expose some of that even more. It is unfortunate that a settlement like this is probably just completely tied up in a confidentiality agreement. So I don't believe we'll ever hear from the plaintiff about that it was, you know, settled, although generally you can say it's complete, it's settled. But sometimes they agree on certain language that they you can only say this.
Yeah.
But I don't think we'll
Because
ever.
I could imagine everyone, this has been a public
Mhm.
lawsuit. Somebody is going to come up to someone at leadership at Ramsey that knows what happened, or someone connected to the plaintiff themselves, and say, what's happening with the case? And are you saying that they have probably some sort of, as a part of the settlement, agreed on what that response would be, like confined to,
They might have
possibly?
some agreements do, or some just get advice from their lawyer that you can say, we came to a mutual understanding, or we came to a mutual agreement and the case has been dismissed. Something like that is common, but I don't think we'll ever hear how much it was. I can, kind of, I can
Right.
gauge my sense of probably it was probably at least this amount. Because
Yeah.
again, when you look at the percentage that the lawyers are going to get, they usually want to cover what they've outlaid. It'd be nice to actually
Yeah.
um, make some money there, but also the lawyers are
Yeah.
getting ready to spend more money in terms of hours to go to
Yeah.
trial, so they're getting to avoid that. But yeah, I don't think we'll hear.
And so for the people that are listening and say, well, that I would never settle, that's just stupid. I would love you to speak to that, because I don't want people to go away thinking that this is like an easy way out, or that somebody should have done one thing or another when they have never been
Mhm.
in that experience. Tell me
Yeah,
about that.
and I think that there's a lot of things that happen in a lawsuit. And I've talked
Yeah.
with clients and potential clients about this very issue. And I will say some people end up filing a lawsuit who never thought that they would be a plaintiff, never thought that they would threaten to sue someone. But
Yeah.
many of the people I talk to, especially in a lot of the work I do is in abuse scenarios, they want accountability. They want to prevent other people from being harmed, and they want the rot exposed, both for both of those reasons, to hold that person accountable, hopefully warn other
Yeah.
people, and to try to, in some ways, to help that person not be a terrible person anymore. But as we've all learned in therapy,
Yeah.
we cannot change other people. And the
Yeah.
thing is that lawsuits in situations like this, or in cases of abuse, because I would consider Ramsey Solutions to have engaged as a company and some of the people individually in high control tactics, which are likened
Yeah.
to abuse. And individually there's some verbal abuse, narcissistic abuse that we clearly see. So similar in that way.
Yeah.
um, Even though you go in with these motives, when I often talk to clients, I say, You can't change this person." And
Mhm.
sadly, when you are dealing with some bad actors, their only language is their money, their reputation, their power, and their control. So, if you want to make a difference in these ways, sometimes the only thing you can do is file a lawsuit, which causes some transparency, as we saw in this case. And that was a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
uh, thing that was brought about by this case, and didn't necessarily need to come out in a trial, because a lot of it did come out in over the course of the case, and unsealing records. But to bring that about, you need to, speaking their language, you're threatening their money that they value so deeply, and it implicates their public reputation, which they also value so deeply. And they've done a lot of work to manage that reputation and to hide all of the rot. So, when you walk in and you want to protect other people and you want to hold them accountable, this is how that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about Ramsey specifically, one of their business models, and one of the things I don't know, areas of business that they do, or where they make money, is they train other businesses on how to follow how they do business, and they set themselves up as sort of this model to replicate by others. Come to our very expensive conferences that are like, we've seen in some of the other lawsuit filings how expensive these conferences are to come and learn from Ramsey leadership how to do business like they do. And so they have a vested interest in protecting that. So this having even a lawsuit that involved an employment issue was a huge deal for a place that makes a lot of money, I would assume, teaching others what they say are the correct ways to run a
Right. I
business.
mean, think about you're in a trial, and I expected that, if this did go to trial, there would probably be media involved, potentially national media, given
Yeah,
that Dave has a national platform, on a radio show. So,
yeah,
imagine national media saying this company has no policies and procedures. They have no HR training for their employees, or just things that would
yeah,
flabbergast a lot of people. They're getting sued for firing someone because they're gay. They're getting sued for firing someone because they got pregnant from sex inside or outside of marriage, whatever situation. But they're not firing these guys who are addicted to porn and watching porn on company computers. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think that would have threatened their business model if this stuff is coming out. Because how can you say we do business the right way? Because I imagine a lot of these companies that are taking in some of their advice couldn't imagine not having policies and procedures, and uh,
Yeah, it's
and the
interesting.
disconnect that would result when they realize, oh, we're believing this other advice of them, but that other stuff is not good, and they wouldn't want to get sued for all these
I
reasons.
mean, imagine a CEO who spends money to come to an entree leadership master series event. Yeah, also brings some of their other C-suite people, HR people to come, and they decide to do what Ramsey said. If they end up being sued themselves for doing some of those same things, that would be a really interesting outcome.
Yeah.
I don't know that that would ever happen,
Well, it
but
kind of reminds me
I think it would give some
it reminds me
pause.
of the timeshare exit team lawsuit, which is uh, still out there. And that the
Yeah,
fact that people said, well, Dave Ramsey recommended these people. He said they were great and they did,
yeah.
all the correct things. And so I paid them my money, and then, you know, it all went down the tubes. So I could potentially imagine a company saying, well, Dave told us to interview the spouse and to do these things, and we followed that, and then we got sued for it.
We
Yeah.
trusted you.
So yeah, I'd be
Yeah,
looking for that lawsuit to
it's
happen.
interesting. When you bring up a timeshare exit team, I would love to remind people of sort of the timeline of a bunch of lawsuits that happened. I was looking back at the summer of 2020, and this was shockingly just full of one thing after another. I think the timeshare exit team thing may have been happening in the periphery before we were
Mhm.
aware of it, happening in Washington State earlier in 2020 before we were aware of it. But by the summer, within like a day or several days, there was the O'Connor lawsuit that was filed, and then the
Mhm.
Marriott suit was like within, I think, the same week was a suit that was brought by Ramsey against Marriott, and then a counter suit Marriott against Ramsey at the exact same time. And then we end up with the Stamps case and the Amos case. It was one thing after
Yeah.
another, and just the amount of things that had
And this
happened
was after the
in a very
this was after the
short.
PAFRA case, which you had stumbled on
Yes.
6 months earlier, where a
Yeah.
YouTube real estate personality had joined.
Yeah, about a year and a half earlier, I probably stumbled across it because it would have been the fall of
18, that's right. Yeah,
2018.
so it was not right before, but
Yeah.
that kind of drug on for a little
Yeah.
while, where they got a kind of a restraining order against him from talking about this stuff. But he also exposed some of the rot in terms of how they were dealing with their kind of people who recommended their services and received funds.
Yeah, and his allegations about what kind of vetting was actually happening for their endorsed
Mhm.
providers. He was trying to make the argument that how did I get accepted if they vet for the very best people because this person had been very publicly anti-Ramsey on a YouTube channel. Now that lawsuit also went away. We'll
Yep.
never know what happened with that. YouTube videos were taken down. But it was a very bad season for Ramsey when it came to lawsuits. And it started, I would say, a different sort of snowball,
Than
a
they
dead
expected.
snowball of like of things that really revealed a lot of things that happened, even without coming to trial for any of these things. I don't know that I don't think anything has come to trial yet, and yet people have left. We don't know the insides and outsides of things, but some people have been fired. A lot of people that have touched these cases have ended up
Hmm.
resigning or going to
Yeah.
work taking an early
Hmm.
retirement. And, we don't have any inside information about that, but it moved things, it shifted things around an awful lot. And just starting this and letting it play out the way it is and let discovery happen and let the truth, the light shine on some of these things made a huge difference for a lot of people and the decisions they
Hmm.
made about where they're going to work and if they were going to leave or just the public perception. It was sort of wild
And I,
to see. We could never have
and I
imagined.
remember being in the midst of that season, and I remember us all praying a lot. God,
Yeah.
expose it all. We know it's
Yeah.
there because we experienced a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because I can speak for me, and I think I can speak for you too. Our hope was for people not to keep being harmed, and for people to keep
Yeah.
to not be deceived anymore. Because there we
Yeah.
knew there were a lot of good people that worked there, and still are a lot of good people. And when you believe one thing and then you either slowly or rapidly are hit with the hypocrisy that is the truth, I mean, it is devastating. Devastating. Obviously, it changed
Yeah.
both of our lives
Yeah, it is.
significantly.
You have to rethink so many things.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I
Yeah.
think God used all of these lawsuits to expose things. We hope, obviously, that it could make changes for the better, or there may continue to be things that are exposed by lawsuits. And again, they don't have to go to trial for things to be
Yeah.
exposed. Our understanding
Yeah.
for the most part, all of these cases have been settled in some way because they didn't go away because of some legal decision. The Marriott case,
The
right,
party's
settled.
settled.
The Stamps case, which was them allegedly firing someone for being gay, that was settled through her bankruptcy case. I think our understanding was for around $80,000 because that's reported in a bankruptcy. So they settled that. So it's not like they're having any victories for engaging in this behavior. It's coming to light. They're having to pay.
Yeah.
And I know we both feel, the idea of a case dragging on so long for the O'Connor case. And, if
Mhm.
you've come out of that, you've gone to therapy, you've gone through healing, at some point, the
Yep.
child that was the subject of that case was by then like 5 years old. You know,
Yeah.
you have let go of a lot of things and you want to move forward. And at least I could say for me, you realize people who do those kinds of things are not going to generally choose to change, especially in the short term. Sometimes they have to be brought
Yeah.
so low in order to make those kinds of changes. And we don't know what's still going to happen now with Ramsey Solutions and any future cases or what God's going to
Yeah.
do, but sunlight has happened and that makes me happy. These things
It
have been
has.
exposed.
I'm grateful for that too. I'm gonna co-sign that I never planned any lawsuit to happen. I was never, as much as I don't know why I was deposed and you were deposed. And I do not know if they had any other witnesses. I didn't see any listed on the public filing. So I've been racking my brain to try to figure out what would be the reason why Ramsey would want to depose us. Maybe it was just because they were mad and maybe they wanted me to feel some pressure because I had spoke publicly about things that they probably wouldn't have wanted me to. But if their argument was ever going to be Amy was a part of this lawsuit and is on some sort of tear to destroy us, I, that is not true.
Yeah.
I did not have interactions with Caitlin O'Connor that I had remembered, except for I found an old email when Nathan worked at Ramsey under a different name, different last name she had about a zoo trip that they were planning, and she was an admin on the team. There was
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, neither of us knew
yeah,
her
this was,
before this case was filed, and
yeah,
I've never met her. I
yeah,
think, in a lot of these
yeah,
cases where you have a bad actor, um the the goal in a lot of this, and I saw this in the Johnny Hunt case, which for people who aren't familiar,
yeah,
Johnny Hunt is the former president of the SBC, and it's now public that
hmm,
I, along with another attorney, represented a victim and who was a witness in that
yeah,
case. But the goal of abusers, and one of the markings of abuse, is confusion. So if you are in a situation where you're completely confused, I know this personally, like in domestic abuse, if you are confused about what is the truth, what is happening, what is going on, your
yeah,
worth, like all of these things, that can be a marking of abuse. So in in that case, in the Hunt versus SBC case, and then I see in this, pulling in all this other information in order to confuse things. So, like I saw in one filing where it referenced you, was that, well, Caitlin, had all these Facebook messages with Amy Fritz, and she deleted them. And but the reality is that actually isn't relevant to the key issues, or even the actual legal issues of the case. That's not relevant. Her
yeah,
motivations regarding those, for bringing the lawsuit, not relevant. Her motivations for talking to you,
yeah,
not relevant. It doesn't relate to the actual facts of whether they fired her in violation of discrimination laws. So it's those confusion
yeah,
goals that happen. And so I think obviously that's, and I think there was an intimidation factor. Obviously, when you received and other
yeah,
people received the cease and desist letters from Ramsey Solutions, it's a very bully move. And and I
yeah.
don't know that they had a lot of witnesses to help them. I mean, who are they going to
I
call?
didn't see anything. I don't know enough about these sorts of things to know if every
No.
witness would have to be like publicly up there, but there was nobody listed that I saw besides myself and you on the public records of people that had been
Yeah, and I mean,
listed
obviously, I
as
don't think
witnesses,
they
I guess.
wanted me on the witness stand at all. They wouldn't have called me because their assertion was that my situation was completely different than Caitlin's. She
Yeah,
had, allegedly had premarital sex, and ex-husband, their employee, was having affairs for 10 years. And they kept him and
yeah,
fired her. I think it was absolutely relevant. Now we can argue about whether they kept him for a discriminatory reason, or really they kept him because he made them a lot of money. But they couldn't admit
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they wouldn't have wanted me on the stand. But I think, there again, it's intimidation factor. Is there any gotcha that we can get her to admit to, that we could use if they were on the stand, to make us look better, or
yeah,
make them look bad, and discredit them as a witness.
yeah, yeah. There was towards the end of my deposition where they asked me to read. They had printed off exchange I had with Caitlin, a DM that we had exchanged on Twitter DM or something, and they wanted me to read it. And I had said, man, I wonder how long these attorneys that are working on this case for Ramsey, when they'll realize that they're working basically for a bad guy. I'm paraphrasing, and will they quit when they realize that? That's what I said. And they wanted me, the Ramsey attorney for some reason wanted me to read that and remember that I said that about them. And I was just dumbfounded. I just sat there and read it and I thought, okay. And I think that I don't remember what the attorney said, sort of asked me to speak on it. And I just said, I guess I was wrong. You didn't quit. I mean, was that is
Well,
literally almost exactly what I said.
did
You didn't
things
quit.
if I
Was
did
that
things
a gotcha?
strategy, that was also, if I'm giving them credit, it was to see how easily flustered are you. Again, some of this is to gauge what you
Was
would be
I?
like as a
D-
witness and if they
Yeah.
could get things to undermine your credibility. I think that wasn't the gotcha they thought it
Well,
would
if that
be.
was the case, I wasn't
No.
flustered.
Yeah. And as
Yeah.
far as we know, their inside counsel is still there. I don't know if that outside counsel still
Yeah.
does work for them. I would, of course, love to believe that either of them have realized, oh, we're working for the bad guy. Um, but
They're trying to do their job with integrity and give them the best shot at defending themselves, which is what a
yeah.
good
Yeah,
attorney
and
does,
lawyers
you
don't
know?
have to like or believe every client that they represent. I mean, obviously there are
Sure.
criminal defense attorneys who are representing, and everybody deserves a
Certainly.
defense. But if you were a civil,
My question is about why would you be someone's general counsel?
good question. I mean, but in a
Right.
civil
That's
lawyer, you
different.
can, this is not a criminal context where people deserve due process and deserve a defense.
Yeah.
Like a civil lawyer, you can, in some ways, choose your clients. I personally would not want to work for a bully or be paid by a harmful bully. And I wouldn't consider it good business practice because if they're bullying people out there, what do you think they're going to do for your fees and for their interaction with you? So it's not just a value judgment, it's
Yeah.
also a business decision in who are you choose your clients and who is going to make your life a lot harder in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. So for the online forum people that are listening, that are arguing, hey, Dave's really gotten away with a whole lot of things without any publicity on this. He's made it all go away quietly. Do you think that's
No,
the case? I don't think it's true. I don't know that it has all gone away quietly and that
no, I
nobody
think
knows about it.
that something that was important to me early on, personally, and then whether it relates to this case or whatever, is that people can, if they so choose, learn the truth. And
Yes.
before,
Yeah.
there were some things out before we started speaking. Lots of credit to the people that started speaking out before we ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Daily
People that I
Beast article in
dismissed.
2014,
Yeah.
but it was, a lot of it was well hidden too. And what was important to me was that if people want to see the truth, if they want to open their eyes, if they want the scales to fall off, there are pieces of information that aren't hidden that they can go to and try to make sense. That's the other thing, to make sense of their own experience. So they can either see the truth, or if they have
Yeah.
also been harmed themselves, they can go, oh, they've done this to other people. um, and so that sunlight has
Yeah.
happened. There's a lot of public documents, there's a lot of articles now. And I have a lot of empathy for the people who are still there, who may be either blindly following it
Oh, yeah.
or taking a paycheck and they're not blindly following, or they slowly awaken and start peeling through. I get visits to I know that come from inside the building, and I'm like,
Yeah.
kudos to you. Start looking for the truth.
Yeah. I have no judgment for people that are needing a job and don't, it's not necessarily easy to find the sort of job they're looking for. Maybe they have a niche sort of thing. Maybe they have a kid that has having surgery next month and they can't be without insurance. There are a lot of reasons. I want people to feel like they have agency to make the decision that's best for them. And I
Mhm.
do not know what that is. Also, I try to recruit them and woo them away from their jobs. I've put information out publicly that anybody can interact with if they want.
I think because of our own experiences and how what it took for us to open our eyes, we do have a lot of empathy and would never tell people
Yeah.
what they need to do. I will say, for people
Yeah.
that want to know the truth, for people that want um, to help make sense of what happened there or in other high control organizations, our doors and DMs are always open, because it's better to wrestle with the hard things and wrestle with the truth and look at the facts than to stick your head in the sand, which I feel like I did for
Yeah.
many years
And if it
myself. And mm,
and it might take a while. And that's fine. I've had interaction with people since that have run into me in the grocery store and said, "Hey, I just want you to know, my
mm,
spouse believes you." They struggled originally. It was hard. But this many years later, they do. And I feel nothing but sad that they had to come to that realization that they had been duped. There's no joy in me. In some ways, I felt glad to hear it. Also brokenhearted that people who had dedicated their life to a place had to process and reckon with the idea that it just wasn't what they thought. And that's heartbreaking. I don't wish that on anybody. I'm glad for people to know the truth. I'm I'm so sad on their behalf that they have to feel that
yeah,
hurt and
I'll tell
harm.
you one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation was, a concept that is often so weaponized in the Christian community, and that is like forgiveness. And, if a lawsuit is settled, does that mean that people have worked through everything? Does that mean there's any reconciliation? No, I doubt it. But speaking for me personally, like, I have struggled over time in wanting this to just be laid bare, for there to be
Yeah.
a trial where these things are exposed. And, of course, I've told my parts of my story in different places, but I think about like some of the very specific individuals there, some that are gone and some are still there, and some that I'm still connected to in social
Yeah.
circles or whatever. And, what does that look like? I've wrestled now that there isn't going to be a trial. What does that look like when I
Yeah.
have someone that is there that by all expectations is a fellow believer, and they
Yeah.
personally were part of the harm that to me,
Yeah.
is there just this private forgiveness that I work on? Is there a point where, I'm
Yeah.
a big letter writer, and so people in my life that, that I want to say my piece to, or even wrestling through, I write letters. I've written letters to my kids many times over the years, wonderful letters and hard letters. And so I've thought about, do I say my piece? Like when they say go to your brother. And again, I would never recommend this in a situation
Yeah.
of abuse, that anybody confront someone who has harmed them in that way. But I had 5 years of therapy. I've worked
Yeah.
really hard on this, and I still wrestle with some of the individuals that are there that specifically caused harm, that I've never said to them, here's what you did. I told you that this was happening. And
Yeah.
I asked you for
Yeah.
help. And here's what you said to me. And here's what you did to me. And here's where you lied and where you. And so I've thought about writing that kind of letter. Maybe it's just written for me. I think that's what a therapist would say. But again, now that there's no trial,
Yeah.
I think more about that in terms of, especially people that are still there who are never going to probably have a conversation with me about it. But yeah, those are some of the hard things. I feel like there's no right answer, and we're all just
Yeah.
navigating things the best way that we can. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've never done this before. I never have. Was there anything else as you were thinking through the sort of things you wanted to mention for this that we didn't cover?
No, I would say for people that, similar to the plaintiff in the O'Connor case, if they're considering suing or bringing a case against a harmful organization that has done them harm, I would encourage them to speak to a trauma informed lawyer,
Yeah.
because you you don't want to
Yeah.
do yourself more harm. And there's lots of options. The option isn't always to bring a lawsuit, and especially for people who, like I said, want that person to change and believe they can change, because we believe that, right? That you can still heal while you're engaging in accountability. It's not a linear process.
Yeah.
But my I wish all the best for the plaintiff in this case. I hope she got her due that assuages some of the pain and embarrassment. She didn't need to be
Yeah.
embarrassed, but you know put on blast by somebody who is wealthy
Yeah.
and powerful in your community is terrible. She It was at
Yeah.
her courage in being willing to be
Yes.
um, drugged through the ringer, that a lot of the rot and hypocrisy
Yeah.
was exposed. So I commend her for that. I commend her attorneys who fought very hard
Yeah.
in this case. And who knows when the next, I
Yeah.
don't think any new employees will probably bring a lawsuit, since now our understanding is they're all under forced arbitration. But
Yeah,
who
probably.
knows?
Who knows? Yeah. I also wish the best to Caitlin, and I know that this was took a lot of courage for her. It was a long road, and whatever decision she made, I believe she made the best decision for her. And I hope she has peace and is able to have less of a burden going forward. That's my hope for her. So
Thanks for
thanks,
having me.
Melissa. This has been helpful.